Well, hello, this is John Lucas. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I turn beads on platters and vessels and handles and spindles, things like that. There are several ways to turn beads. I'm going to start off with probably the easiest method, which is to use a beading tool. Now, these are homemade beading tools that I've made. This one, two were made from a screwdriver. This one I made by flattening some round stock and then filing it down. You'll notice they're ground at an angle. And to use them, you would think that you just stick them straight in, but if you stick the tool straight in, you get a lot of torn grain. It works a lot better if you'll start down low and pull the tool up through it. And you can see I've got some chip out here. Now this is a piece of pretty crummy pine. It's not going to turn as clean. And I chose that for a reason, to kind of show you the problems. Let's try my other one. That's a little bit less. I was a little more gentle with it. Got just a tiny bit of chip out right there. I make my spaces. Then I would take a skew with the toe and I'd cut the grooves in the bottom. Then I use a spindle gouge. I start at the center and just rotate it over. Now what I'm doing that's kind of hard to see from camera angle is, first of all, the tool has to rotate around, and then because the bevel is at an angle, the tool has to come around this way to give me a square-sided bead. And I find that easier to do by transferring the cut from the toe down to this edge. So I lift up, I'm touching the bevel, lift it up till it starts to cut, and as I rotate it, I move the handle with my body around to the right. And I don't know if you can see that from the camera angle, but now it's cutting down about here instead of right on the toe. Now you do the same thing on the left side. You always start in the center, find the bevel, now move the handle to the left and lift the handle up. Now actually it's three motions in one. It's twisting the handle, it's moving the handle to the right, and it's lifting the handle up to get to the bottom of the cut. So I move the handle, I lift the handle, so I'm rotating the handle, I'm moving the handle to the left, and I lift the handle. Now you don't have to stop. If you're doing this very controlled with the tool against your body, you see I can stop anywhere I want. If I don't move, nothing happens. So I can move the body to the left a little bit and then lift it up, make little minor corrections, and just kind of creep up on the shape until I get it right. The nice thing about doing it this method is that I have a very clean cut. There's no tear out. It's a little harder to control the shape and does take a lot of practice. Another good way to do it, for the people fairly new, again, I go back to my little homemade skew here, cut my V-cuts. And you make the V-cuts, you know, as deep as you want, as wide as you want, depending on the shape of your bead. Now what I would do is lay the skew down flat. Now you do have to be real careful not to stick the toe of the skew into this bead over here. So I start at the bottom and I drag it up like that. This method works really well. I still use this today. I do a fair amount of reproduction work for antique furniture, and a lot of times they've given you one piece of wood and you can't screw up because you only have that one piece. And even though this is not the method that I would do on my own turnings, I know that I can turn a bead with a skew and not mess it up. Now you'll see that those are pretty clean also. There's another method that's real handy, and this is called a 3-point tool. It's got 3 sides. I've polished them. Again, I'd go back and set my spacing if you want to, if you want all your beads to be consistent. Now this tool works, you cut the V-cut. Now if you want a little bit cleaner sides, you can start from one side and push your way down, rather than just push it straight in. Then what you do to do your bead is you go into the deep part of the groove and you come back out around to the outside. So it's kind of the same way I was doing the skew. Again, you have to be very careful not to stick the toe into that bead. So, now if you're not getting a really clean cut on your beads, that does a pretty good job. This is real inexpensive pine, and I had those holes from nails in it. Caused a little problem. The beads are a little flat on top, so we'll just go in and we'll make them deeper. You can see even with nail holes in there, this tool works pretty effectively. Now this would be the same way that I would make beads if I was doing beads on the outside of a bowl or beads on a hollow vessel. When I do beads on a platter, I do them a little differently, and I'm going to show you that. Okay, we have my simulated platter here, which looks an awful lot like one of my hand mirrors. I'm going to show you a couple ways to turn beads on a platter. It's a little different from turning beads on a spindle because it's a little harder to roll the tools in some cases. First method I'm going to show you is using my beading tool. We're going to go in here and carve out a little bead. Now this would be assuming that you want a bead below the surface. Again, I start with the handle very high, and I gradually bring it up real gently. That last little cut is the delicate one because the wood is coming straight across the top of the tool, so it's just like a flat scraper. No shear cut. So it requires a very gentle touch. But it makes a pretty good bead. I don't have this one quite cleaned up yet. Let me go back in and do that. Okay, that doesn't look all that bad. A little bit of tear out here and there, not real bad. The other method is, again, we'll go back to the 3-point tool. And we'll cut a pretty good little groove in there for a bead. And again, I'll start on the outside edge and I'll come back in. Now there's one advantage of this tool that I haven't talked about yet, and that is you actually have a bevel over here. So if I rub that bevel and I bring it around, I get a little bit cleaner cut. So instead of leaving it flat like this, what I do is rotate it in so it's touching the bevel. There we go. And that's not a bad looking bead. It's a little flat. I've got a little groove right there because I didn't go all the way in, all the way around. Try to keep my hand out of the camera. That works pretty good. It's still not as clean as I would like, but it does work pretty well. The other method I like to use is with my spindle gouge. Now the problem with using a spindle gouge is I can turn this side of the bead really well, but when I try to turn this side of the bead, I hit the bed of my lathe. So it occurred to me one day that the wood doesn't know the angle that I'm at or where my tool rest is at. So you'll notice now what I've done is bring my tool rest way above center. Center's down here. What that does is puts my tool at this angle. So now when I turn this side of the bead, I clear the bed of my lathe. So in this case, by raising the tool rest up, I'm able to turn this bead pretty much the same way that I would when I'm turning a spindle. You know, I move the handle out, I lift the handle, and then to turn this side, it's the same way. I move the handle in while lifting up. And if I didn't get my head in the way of the camera, we've got a pretty good approximation of a bead. And it's a lot cleaner. It requires very little sanding. I'm going to make one finer adjustment of this. Again, once you start that cut, if you don't push, the tool will sit there. So I can take my body and push my body to the right a little bit, lift the handle up, make a fine tune, rotate the tool, and I can really clean up that bead by doing it that way. And last but not least would be using the skew again. We'll make a bit of a V cut here, get down a little bit lower. And then you can lay the tool down flat, rotate it around and make your bead. Now the last cut I'm going to show you is with a bowl gouge. I do this a lot on my mirrors. It's kind of the same thing that I do with the spindle gouge in that first thing I do is find the bevel, lift the handle up very, very slightly till it starts to cut. Then I rotate it around, I move my body to the left. Now this is a very delicate cut, but it's just a push cut like I'm doing with turning bowls. Now someone asked me how I sand beads to keep the tops from getting flat. What you have to avoid, of course, is not going like that. What I do is I crease the sandpaper and I go into the inside and I turn, say, all of the left sides. And I start down the bottom just like I would with that V tool. I start in the bottom and work my way up. And I hope my dust collector is not making too much noise. Then I'll get some fresh sandpaper and I'll start on the outside and come back up. There's two tricks actually. One of the tricks is to get your beads turned as clean as possible, so that you don't have to start with really coarse sandpaper. My rule of thumb is if you have to start with anything coarser than 220, you're going to change the shape of the wood. This is 180. If I'm real gentle, I can get by with it. But I try to turn them clean enough that I don't have to do that. And what I do is I watch the surface. There's a little bit of an area right in there that looks funny, so I'll get my sandpaper a little more curved here and just try to keep it moving. All in all, it's pretty good. I've got a few little lines I got to take care of out on the side, but y'all don't want to watch me stand here and sand all day.